at over 6,000 kilometers long. Its basin is shared by 10 countries, namely Burundi, Congo-Kinshasa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Egypt, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Sudan, as well as Tanzania. Now, 350 Africa and Arab-hosted art exhibitions, cultural entertainment, educational talks and live concerts across national and regional commemorations of the Nile Day. And we're now joined in studio by Ferrial Adam. She's the World Team Director for 350 Africa as well as Arab World. Ferrial, thank you so much for your time. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Take me through Nile River Day.
Well, Nile River Day started in 1999, and the key focus was clearly just the governments around the Nile River basin to look at how do they better use the Nile River, how do we better protect the Nile River. And since then, there's been an annual event around the river and for countries to have events on those issues. Yeah.
Now, I mentioned about 10 countries, African countries that are part, of, these celebrations and events, amongst them Uganda, Kenya, as well as Burundi, to name a few. Why these 10 countries and what's their role?
Well, the key purpose is that these 10 countries are directly dependent on the Nile.
Right.
For example, Egypt, its main source of water is the Nile. Its main source of transport is through the Nile, if you look at it. So it's a very, very key water resource in that region. Also, if one country, say for example Ethiopia, decides they're going to build a dam, it affects all the countries downstream. And so that is why there needs to be better collaboration amongst countries and governments in terms of what happens. If someone pollutes upstream, the effects are felt along the river.
Right.
And affects millions of people's livelihoods.
And tell me some of the challenges that those countries face, particularly, by the Nile River. We know in the country that there's also drought in parts of KwaZulu-Natal. But when we look at, Egypt, and we look at other parts of those 10 countries I've mentioned, what are some of the challenges they face that directly are affected by the Nile River?
Well, the first one, of course, is the extreme droughts. And with climate change, that is becoming even worse. And so you've got countries that are water scarce, dependent on this particular source of water. And then on top of that, you have climate change, which is creating even more harsh droughts and drought weather patterns. So that's the first one. The second one is there's this jump to develop without really thinking about what would happen to the Nile. So you're looking at infrastructure, you're looking at industry, and industry pumping in pollution into these rivers. So all of that kind of makes the Nile very, very sensitive to the environment and very, very worrying, because we might not be able to use that water in the future. And if we look at the problems we're having here in terms of drought, and if you look at the problems you're having there, you're definitely going to have what we've been talking about, and that's climate migration.
Let's talk about some of those very scary, statistics. I mean, reports say that if the climate change challenge doesn't change, of course, it could be without water. That's those countries, and also Egypt included. Yeah. It could be without water by 2025.
That's as soon
That's
as
scary. That cannot happen.
Well, that's the reality. I mean, if you look at parts of Kenya, if you look at the northeast part of Kenya that borders Ethiopia, there are parts of that country that have been going through a drought for the last 15 years. It's beyond a drought, it's desertification now, and people have moved. They've migrated south, and that's going to continue because people have to have livelihoods. They have to have water for their cattle and for food, and that's the challenge right now.
And what do you advise people could do, of course, to reserve or rather reverse those impacts of climate change so we don't experience that in 2025?
Well, I think firstly for South Africans and Southern Africa, we need to take heed and learn from the lessons that we see what's going on further north. And I think we need to be more cognizant of our water resources and not waste it, which we're doing all the time by giving it to coal mines to use for washing coal, etc. So I think that there's that element, but also we need to push our governments to have a stronger position on climate change. It's not enough to go to the UN meetings every year, sign agreements, but then have no implementation in place.
So what do you think could be done just beyond even their awareness? I mean, I know at the moment there are regional commemorations, national commemorations, live awareness days that are taking place on Nile River Day. But what do you think could be done, of course, so those voices can reach?
A lot of what we're doing is education and awareness. So a lot of Nile, not many people even know there was a Nile Day. So it's about building that awareness and creating an understanding of how important that river is, not only to the basin, to that 10 countries, but to the whole continent.
Right. All right, Ferrial. Well, that's all the time we had for you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Pleasure.
Well, that was Ferrial Adam. She's the World Team Director for 350 Africa and Arab World, of course, taking us through what is happening for Nile River Day. Now, Save the Children